So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Christine Sheppard today. Dr. Sheppard earned her BA and PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at Cornell University. In her first job at the Bronx Zoo Bird Department, where she ultimately became curator and chair, Dr. Sheppard became interested in the problem of glass collisions and bird mortality. Dr. Sheppard joined the board of the Bird Safe Glass Foundation and in 2009 moved to the American Bird Conservancy as Collisions Program Manager. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sheppard tonight as she reviews the issue of bird collisions and describes strategies for reducing bird mortality.
Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome.
Let me just get this going. Okay. So most collisions are songbirds. And I usually show this little clip because most of my presentations are done for architects. And for architects, birds tend to be things like pigeons, starlings, and house sparrows. They're nuisance birds. So they don't really understand the kinds of birds that collide them. I hope this group is aware of the type of birds that most people get. It's important initially to distinguish between two things that people think are collisions. One is a situation where something like a cardinal or a robin repeatedly attacks a window. That is territorial aggression, and it's not what we're talking about. The situation that we're interested in right now is when a bird flies full speed at a window, not realizing that it's there for one reason or another. And unfortunately, even if a bird flies away after a collision, the odds are that it's not going to make it. They have concussions, they have fractured livers, and they can die as many as a week or 10 days after they actually hit the glass. So this is a devastating problem. It's something that I've been working on full time since 2009, and we do have good solutions. There was a meta-analysis of data provided by a lot of volunteer groups as well as museums that were collecting bird carcasses and so forth. And this was done by the Smithsonian, published in 2014. The estimate was that as many as 1 billion birds are killed a year in the US alone by collisions with glass. The only thing that is more dangerous to birds is cats. And for the sake of the cat, for the sake of yourself, and for the sake of wildlife, keep those kitties indoors. Not everybody understands that we need birds. Birds are very important to our lives, not just because they have intrinsic value, but because they also have cultural value, they have economic value. When California goes up in flames, birds bring seeds in to restore habitat. Birds are natural pest control agents. They contribute hundreds of billions of dollars every year to agriculture. We're not aware of that on a daily basis. We might encounter birds and listen to them sing, but we don't really understand how integral birds are to the living system that we're a part of. And birds do have a large constituency. This increased dramatically during COVID as people were stuck at home looking for something interesting to watch. So what do we need to know to solve the problem of collisions? As I mentioned, collisions are not rare, but you'd think, if you're talking about 1 billion birds, that you might see more of them, and you probably will. The more aware you are that this is an issue, the more you're going to notice carcasses under shrubs, swept up with the trash. The primary reason we don't see more carcasses is that scavengers are very, very swift at staking out good windows. So it's actually been documented that some scavengers will check a window 2 or 3 times a day. So a carcass may not last very long if scavengers are aware of it. And scavengers are anything from those house cats to rats, to raccoons, skunks, crows, anything that's interested in a nice high protein snack will chomp down a bird. The majority of birds that collide with glass are songbirds. These are birds that migrate at night, but most collisions take place during the day, which is a little bit confusing. Birds fly at night partly because the winds might be calmer. There are many fewer predators. The sun isn't beating down on your back, but also because they have to stop periodically. And when they stop, they're looking to feed, and they can only feed during the day. So they fly at night, and then they get up in the morning. And that is when they are in danger of colliding with windows. Any piece of glass can be dangerous to a bird. Almost 50% of bird collisions, almost 50% of that enormous number take place on homes and other buildings up to about 3 stories. So low-rise buildings are very dangerous. People have this tendency to associate collisions with skyscrapers, and that is really not true. Skyscrapers account for about 2% of the total collisions, largely because there are so few of them, but also partly because birds collide with glass in what you might think of as their activity zone. Birds are generally active where there's vegetation. So glass that reflects vegetation is extremely dangerous to birds because they can't tell the reflection from reality. Now, some of this is hard for us to understand because we think we can see glass. People believe that they can see glass, whereas in fact, we learn about glass when we're very young. We probably don't remember, most of us, when we first understood that there's a transparent material that can be a solid barrier and that can also reflect like a mirror. We understand this conceptually. Birds can understand about individual pieces of glass in their habitat, but they don't understand the concept of glass as we do. And if I take away the cues that you use to identify where you expect to see glass, you can't tell me if this is a picture of a tree, if it's a tree seen through a window, or if it's a reflection of a tree. If I show you more information, you can see that there has to be glass involved. There's a crack there, there are mullions, but only when I show you this do you understand that there's a reflection. None of the cues that you use, you know, birds don't understand that right angles aren't part of nature. They really don't understand glass as a concept, and particularly when they're migrating, they're always in unfamiliar territories. So there is no familiar glass, you know, for them to be able to avoid. You know, even people would be very likely to run into a reflection as strong as this one. It helps to understand a bit more about how bird vision and human vision differ. We've got eyes like other primates in the front of relatively flat faces. We don't have a beak sticking out between our eyes. We see more or less the same thing with each eye, which gives us three-dimensional vision. And we tend to perceive the world as something that is in front of us or something that we're moving into. People always watch where you're going. With birds, your eyes are on the opposite sides of your head. So try to imagine seeing completely different things with each eye. They have relatively little field overlap. So they don't have very good 3D vision. They have other ways of telling how fast they're going or how soon they're going to get to their destination. And presumably they perceive the world as something they're immersed in. What's out to the side and what's behind them may be even more important than what's in front of them. My model for a bird in flight in an open habitat is actually a kid texting on a skateboard, which I have seen twice, but never been able to actually capture on video. This guy on a hoverboard is the closest I've been able to get. Excuse me. So how we stop collisions is by convincing birds that they're not in an open habitat, that what they're flying toward is a habitat that is complicated, that they aren't going to be able to fly through, that they want to be able to fly around. We can apply patterns to glass. There are now companies that are manufacturing entire lines of glass with patterns designed to deter bird collisions. The important thing is the spacing. Birds know how big they are, and most birds won't fly between vertical lines that are 4 inches apart. Most birds won't fly between horizontal lines that are 2 inches apart, and you can see why there's a difference there. If you have a 4-inch horizontal gap, a bird with outstretched wings can just slip through. So if you've heard of the 2x4 rule, that is what this was based on. Now, after a number of years of recommending the spacing, we discovered that hummingbirds are perfectly happy to try to fly through a 4-inch vertical gap. So the current recommendation for spacing, if you're using visual markers to stop collisions, is 2 inches in any direction. Now, the visual markers have to be big enough for the birds to see from far enough away that they can change direction. So we estimate that birds need to be able to see the visual markers from maybe 10 feet away. This means that if you're using something like a dot, it needs to be a 1/4 inch in diameter. If you're using lines, 1/8 of an inch in diameter, or in width, sorry. It doesn't have to be just dots and stripes. You'll see a lot of dots and stripes, but you can use wiggly lines. In fact, asymmetrical patterns actually seem to work better for birds than arrays of dots and lines. And we actually have patterns that will deter bird collisions that cover less than 1% of the glass surface. So what's a bird-friendly building? If you want to build a bird-friendly glass box, you can. This is the Intuit headquarters in Mountain View, California. Mountain View requires bird-friendly design. And so they went with the glass that you can see here. It has a horizontal pattern that is annealed into the glass. So the lines are made of ceramic dots. That's permanent, but you can see out very well. And from the parking lot, you really can't tell that that glass is bird-friendly at all. So bird-friendly architecture isn't weird, it's not different. Almost any kind of architecture can be made bird-friendly. Here's an example from Vancouver University in British Columbia. Again, these are lines that are created with what's called frit, those ceramic, tiny ceramic dots that melt together into a pattern. This is kind of a weird building. This is the FBI headquarters in Houston, and this green structure acts as a sunshade. There are lots of sunshades that are bird-friendly, structures that are actually mounted outside the windows, used to control heat and light, but also deterring bird collisions. And in the case here, the structure is also a security device. So you can do a lot of different things and be bird-friendly at the same time. This is the S.J. Quinney School of Law in Salt Lake City, Utah. Salt Lake City doesn't have any requirements for bird-friendly design. This campus just decided that they wanted a bird-friendly building. All of the glass on this building is bird-friendly. Some of it has a pattern on it, some of it has louvers in front of it, and some of it has insect shades. Just an insect screen on the outside of the glass can make it bird-friendly. So what if you already have a building, which I assume is the case for most of you? There are a number of excellent solutions that are also cost-effective that you can use on home windows. On the right side here, you see patterns that I actually drew on my windows using tempera paint and a stencil. My indoor cat is admiring that. On the left, this is a shot from the Key West airport. This man is installing a window film, which is actually very similar to the design that you saw on the Intuit headquarters. This was an interesting story. The problem glass is a building connector between the parking structure and the main terminal. And for some reason, birds were hitting the glass instead of flying above it or below it. And the carcasses were falling on taxis. And the taxi drivers were the ones that brought this problem to the attention of the terminal. And they agreed to install this solution to solve the problem. Kaleidoscape was the earliest solution marketed as a bird collision stopper. You might know it as bus wrap. If you've ever been on a shuttle going between a parking lot and an airline terminal, again, I guess that's a theme. You'll notice that they often have advertising on the outside, but you can see out from inside. That's what this material was originally designed for. The installation on the right was put up at NASA when an entire flock of indigo buntings hit that wall. They didn't want to repeat that experience. On the left is NCTC, the National Conservation Training Center. It turns out that this solution is one of the only ones that meets sort of federal guidelines, but it is highly effective and it will also cut down on solar gain. Feather Friendly is a Canadian company, and they have been making this type of solution that you see here and marketing it since about 2010. It goes up like a window film, but you pull the backing off, leaving basically three-dimensional vinyl dots. This is an array of dots, but they have a lot of other different kinds of patterns. It doesn't just have to be a grid. And as you can see on the right, from the inside, you don't really notice these dots. They kind of disappear against the complicated background that you see outside. ABC Bird Tape is back on the market. We developed this product because a lot of people were using decals and only putting up one or two, not really understanding that whole spacing issue that's so important. And I actually started this, I was cutting decals into quarters and then putting all these tiny little pieces up on windows. And I realized it would be much easier if you just had a tape that you could put up. So that's how this product got developed. The thing about this tape is that it is intended to last on the outside of the glass for a number of years. It's not something that you want to use if you're only going to do something seasonal. Easy Up shades, these are commercially available. They go up with suction cups. They'll make them to fit any configuration of window that you've got. Again, you can see out from the inside, but they eliminate the reflections that are so dangerous to birds. I am a paint fan, I admit it. There I am on the left, standing in front of, I used to live in a town called Pelham in New York, and there was a chiropractor there, and they had their windows decorated seasonally, not for birds, mostly for their customers. But this definitely makes the windows bird friendly. The pattern at the top right was done at the University of British Columbia. They made that using a pattern behind the glass that they followed using oil-based marker pens. So that was done by a whole class of students. And you can do things that are relatively simple, as I said. You can take tempera paint and just put squiggles on the glass, or you can be as artistic as some of the examples here. There are places that actually have contests for the best design to put up on a particular set of windows. You can also use stencil rollers, and these can put up a much more complicated pattern than you can do with a brush or a sponge. I mentioned decals. Decals are what people seem to be most familiar with. And there's a long history of that I won't go into, but here are some examples of decals installed with the proper spacing. The decals themselves are bigger than they need to be for birds to see them. So, you know, that is an issue. You can use decals, but you have to put up quite a lot of them, and it blocks your view fairly much. And I don't know why that's there. There's a new product on the market called Bird Divert, made by the National Window Film Company. This is a product that is reflecting in the UV. So you don't see it because humans can't see ultraviolet, but many birds can, particularly songbirds can. So this product has only been on the market for less than a year. This is an installation in Lower Manhattan that's going up. It has been successfully installed at Zion National Park since sometime last spring. So it does appear to be working well. And it is an option for people to put on their homes. External motorized shades are also a terrific solution. The one on the left is from the house I just moved from. The nice thing about motorized shades is that you can put them down when you're not in the room, or if you go on vacation so that nobody can look in. But you can put them up when you're there, and you can keep them up during seasons when collisions aren't particularly frequent. I've always wanted to visit the hotel on the right there, the Puerta de las Americas, which is in Mexico City. You can buy screens. If you don't have screens on your windows, Bird Screen is available. They can be applied using rods that have suction cups to put on your window, and then they just hook. Again, this is something that you can do seasonally. You can take them back down again. They make a special version for sliding doors. Frequently, one half of a sliding door has a screen and the other one does not. Netting is something people ask about a lot, and we don't generally recommend it. It can be a very effective option, but you have to monitor it continually. You have to make sure that it is always taut, which is difficult for installation. If it's not taut, birds can get tangled in it. And you have to make sure that it doesn't get holes in it. If there are holes in a netting, birds can get through it and they will get trapped behind it. They won't be able to find the hole to get out. So I would only advise netting if you are really willing to put that effort into monitoring it all the time. There are a number of available window films. The one on the left there is simple horizontal lines. It's manufactured by a company called Solix for decorative window films, and National Window Film makes a very similar product. They also have vertical lines. They've got films that have dot patterns on them. They actually have some films that have drawings of birds on them. So you can be very simple, or you can be very decorative with a window film as a solution. But they don't have to be visually intrusive. And I'm going to provide a link to our website so that you can find the sources for all of the different things that I've been talking about here. Acopian bird savers is another excellent solution. I've been working with people at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they just put Acopian bird savers on all of the glass on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is terrific. There are different ways to install them. Basically, what you're doing is you're hanging cords every 4 inches across the window, hanging a couple of inches away from the glass. We're starting to see sort of commercial installations. That central photograph is the Department of Environmental Conservation in Maryland. We're starting to see window washers learning to install Acopian bird savers and other bird collision solutions. The bird saver on the bottom right was simply made with twine. So they can be elaborate. On the left there, the cords were installed in frames, which were then set into the windows themselves, so that the person didn't have to stand on a ladder for hours tying knots and strings. But this can be very cost effective. If you want, the Acopian bird saver people will make them for you and send them to you. They will send you plans so that you can make your own. It is a very simple, highly effective, cost-effective solution. Bird crash preventers are somewhat similar, but they're made out of monofilament, so they don't work quite as well because they're not quite as visible. But there are many people in Southern California that have installed these and say they work extremely well. So if you go to birdsmartglass.org, on the landing page, you'll see information about all of these solutions. You can also download our flyer, which you see on the left there. We have it in several languages, and it also has links for most of the solutions I just spoke about. We've got a lot of other resources on our website, including bird-friendly building design. You can download that and learn about the collision problem in depth. And here we are back to the birds again. So that's the end of the talk, and I would be very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much. That was very informative and interesting. If you have any questions from the audience.
Hello, Dr. Sheppard. It seems as you were going through the slides that many of them showed windows that were reflecting another window. And I'm not, in other words, what I would see would be a building with a big window, and at a 45 or 90 degree angle from that one view, there would be the same thing inside the window, as though one window was reflecting off of another.
Well, that can certainly happen. I'd have to go back and look through my slides. I don't think I've ever noticed that.
The one that stood out to me had a green umbrella on the patio. And I just was wondering if it's that easy for a camera to pick it up. I guess they must be pretty safe and effective. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking about them. But I was hoping for just a little more explanation for that. And then the last thing is, I think I saw in an early slide that we shouldn't use or cover up more than 7% of the surface of the glass.
No, you don't have to cover up more than 7%. And in fact, there are effective solutions that only cover 1%. So if people are worried that they'll have to cover up their windows, that's not true. Some of these, again, we talk about dots, but if you put properly spaced small dots on your window, you're covering up a relatively small percentage of the glass. So you don't have to cut off your sunshine, you can still see out.
About the patio thing, there was 2 different pictures, I think, one next to the other.
I think that was 2 different things, 2 different pictures. It was a picture of the outside looking in and the picture of the inside looking out.
So I have one comment. beyond the fact that it was very informative, as I mentioned, and a question, the comment was, I've seen hawks come into my yard and chase the birds into the windows, trying to
Yeah,
get
this
them. So
won't
birds of prey have
necessarily,
picked up on this.
this is actually something that's turned out to be quite common. Birds of prey learn that as a hunting technique. And this is a situation where when a bird is fleeing a hawk, they're often paying more attention to what's behind them. So even if you've got your window remediated, a bird may still fly into it if a hawk is chasing it.
Yeah, it's interesting evolution or adaptation. The
Yeah.
question I have is it possible, maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but is it possible to make regular glass windows that have the UV striping or patterns embedded in them already? Not a coating on the outside or the inside, but
Yes, there is one company that has worked with companies that create home windows. Arnold Glass makes Ornolux. And there are a number of houses around the US, in fact, that have UV windows.
because that would, if you can get those into the new homes, that would be useful.
Yes, this is, we're trying to work with the companies that make window frames. Unfortunately, the commercially available glass is, doesn't fit home window frames. So there's a whole coordination between the glass distributors and the glass window frame manufacturers that has to get created there. But that's definitely something in the works.
The question is the glass UV reflective?
There are about 6 different companies that make glass that have patterns in the ultraviolet. Generally, the pattern itself reflects UV at a high level, but this is partnered with a coating in the glass that absorbs ultraviolet. So what you're trying to do is maximize contrast. So usually that coating that absorbs UV keeps it from coming in to the structure, where the pattern is reflected and is what the bird sees.
Could you tell us more about the cities? I know in Canada and perhaps in the United States, I don't know how many cities have made it a rule that windows should be protected, should be covered to protect the birds, and how difficult was the procedure to get this accepted?
It can be quite difficult. We've been involved.
My biggest flaw.
I'm sorry. We've been involved in legislative efforts around the country since 2011, when San Francisco passed their bird safe building design standards. There are probably 10 or 15 different communities in Northern California or around the Bay Area, including Oakland, and San Jose, Cupertino, that have passed a version of San Francisco's legislation. Unfortunately, San Francisco was first, and so their legislation is weaker than some of the legislation that's passed since then. Maryland passed legislation just earlier this week that covers state-owned and leased buildings. New York City passed legislation in 2020, which covers all new construction in all the boroughs of Manhattan. So whether it's a private home in Staten Island or a skyscraper in Manhattan, it has to be bird friendly. Washington, D.C. recently passed something that was very similar. Chicago has legislation. Some of the individual counties in Maryland have legislation. If you look on our website, we have a page where you can link to the text of the different legislation around the country. There's a lot of them now.
I think there's a question from Janet. Janet, do you have a question? You need to unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
it's more a comment. I was watching the floor debate in the Maryland legislature for the bill you just mentioned. And I was getting rather worked up when certain legislators were saying, I've worked in downtown Baltimore for 30 years or whatever. And, you know, I walk around every morning and I've never seen a dead bird on the ground.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone else saying, there's no data on this, is there? You know, how
There's
many birds?
Tons of data on it. Well, I'm sure you
Oh,
know.
I know. And, you know, someone else say, why are we caring about dead birds when there's so much, you
This
know,
has been
not crime
very-
and violence in Baltimore? Why are we, yeah,
It took 6 years to get that through in Maryland.
really?
And every year it would pass one or both houses, and there would be some reason that it, you know, never was official. And this year it finally got past the filibuster and everything else. I mean, apparently that, you know, there's an element that is just trying to obstruct, you know, any new legislation.
I think we have a word for that element, but I'm not going to use it here. Yes.
No, I haven't, I'm not saying anything.
I think we know who, yeah. Okay. Thank you for your hard work on this.
Thanks for caring.
Are there any other questions? Right. Thank you so much,
All right.
Christine. That was wonderful. Thank you.
I'm happy to do it. Take care.
Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope to see many of you at the May Social on May 10th. Have a good month.
There will be reminders sent out. There will be reminders sent out.
Yes,
It's not like, yeah.
Well, thanks for attending.